I've been doing a lot of traveling lately, and I was in Ireland, I was in Bangalore, so it's just taken I guess, a toll on me. But anyway, the reason I'm here is to talk about our journey. Again, this is not about perfection or of what we have done at Yahoo, but more about the progress we have made. Roughly the agenda, let me just is going to look like this. Again, as I mentioned, it's mostly about our journey and not about our perfection. But at a very high level, what I was trying to do, what I've been trying to do at Yahoo over the past 3 years is, initially when I joined Yahoo, I interviewed a bunch of people, understood what their pain points were, and ever since, we've been on a journey to remove some of those pain points, remove some of those barriers between idea and execution. So roughly, I'll be talking about like what my vision is, the 4 different initiatives we had at Yahoo. Again, those are still work in progress, and then hopefully, I don't think I'll have time for questions. But anyway, the vision has always been about velocity. I used to work at Imbue. I worked there for a long time. Imbue, as you know, lean startup, continuous delivery, one of the pioneers of continuous delivery. So it's really about trying to ship fast, fail fast. You're trying to democratize innovation so that you can, by removing those barriers between idea and execution, so that people come to work every day, wanting to change the world and things like that. And then hopefully create entrepreneurs along the way. This is a story of all my interviews. I mean, this is there was an engineer called Ash, who was probably like one of my favorite people I interviewed. He actually wanted to do something on using machine learning. This was like a long time ago, but then he said, I wish there were like fewer barriers at Yahoo. In terms of barriers, we don't have to go through all these, but again, hardware takes long time to arrive. Product submissions need approvals. ACLs, paranoids, and things like that. But again, it's just there for a reference. We don't have to go through all that. That's when it struck me as leaders or anyone else, right? I think it really comes down to how can we help people like Ash to do their jobs, like people who sort of come to work every day, come to work in the morning, wanting to do something different, wanting to change the world, kind of a thing. If you have enough of people like him at any company, I think it'll be amazing. I think, at least for people like me, I'm deeply passionate about that topic, is to, how can we create those, how can we remove those barriers, how can we create the right environment where people come to work every day excited. Quick question, how many people go to work every day wanting to do something amazing for their customers? Raise your hands. Wow. You guys don't need this talk. Okay, that's great. I mean, it's a shame to see so many people just show up to work and then go home not knowing what they've done. Anyway, if you've ever built software, you know that that's the greatest joy. It could be a script, it could be anything else. There's that satisfaction of building something quickly, showing that your customers quickly, getting feedback quickly, right? That quickly is important, because you don't want to be building something no one wants. Like how many times we have built things and showed it to people, and then no one wants to use it, right? So it's important to get that feedback. Anyway, vision, that's been my, and that's when we came up with this definition. I don't know how important it is, but it's really about eliminating those, DevOps is about eliminating those barriers between idea and execution using software, right? I think the software part is important, right? Unless anyone's been living under a rock or something, software is eating the world, in quotes. But that's where I think everyone is headed towards. So anything we have done has been mostly centered on automation and software building. That's where the journey has begun. Again, it's important if you are trying to do something crazy at any place, make sure you find the right people. Make sure you find your partners. In my case, I found people, like-minded people like me, who wanted to do, at least try and attempt to do big things. And then we came up with this, right? We said DevOps is really about enabling a culture. It's a one-slide thing of ownership and excellence. Engineer agile and automated processes, and then develop reusable and self-serve tools. To kick ass at deliver which is deliver products to market fast, prevent defects from reaching customers, and then repair production issues quickly. Before we go too far, before you all go back and try to go crazy about velocity, don't be foolish about security and privacy. Securing your users and privacy of your users is non-negotiable. In fact, in a case like Yahoo, we have like 1 billion users, so it's important that it's easy to leverage those 1 billion users, but some of the constraints and some of the barriers are inherently there just because of the same things that we leverage. So we have to be very mindful of that as well. Okay, that's when we start executing, right? We talked about the vision, we talked about some aspirational stuff. All good, but once we started executing, I think that's when we started hitting roadblocks, right? So we'll be talking about 4 initiatives, and hopefully I can cover all of them. The first one is called directed alerting, right? What does this mean? But before that, let me ask you all a question, right? I'll present you with 2 options. Option number 1, alerts before they go to the dev teams who have actually written the software. There's 3 layers in between. And option number 2, alerts go directly to dev. Which option would, how many people would pick option 1? Wow, no one? Okay, how many people would pick option 2? Wow. Anyone would pick option 3 if there was an option? If there's somewhere in between? Okay, he's the brave person in the room. Okay. No one would pick option 1? Wow. Does anyone have this kind of a setup at their companies where there's several layers between alerts and, okay. Yeah, I mean, we all have that, right? Again, we picked option 2. So what we mean is, I mean, you probably heard about it. You wrote it, you own it philosophy. Pretty simple, people have been talking about this. It's about, again, fundamentally this is about getting feedback from production quickly to the people who actually wrote the software. It doesn't make sense to have 3 different teams sitting in different continents, whatever, responding to alerts. Just doesn't make sense, right? But turns out it's a rather hard problem, especially at a large company, right? How can you go to teams and say, your job is not important, or you should be doing something else, or we don't want you, we don't want your services. It's like trying to convince 4 different teams that trying to change the way they operate turns out it's a rather hard problem, not a technical problem, but a people problem. So how do you solve this problem? Any guesses? If you were in the situation, what would you do? Okay, that's fine. I think before we solve the problem, it's important to understand again, what is the vision? What was I trying to do? I said, page dev teams directly, try to get from thousands of alerts to 2 alerts per shift so that we can actually keep up with root causing each of the alert. And then all alerts are actionable, all alerts require human intelligence. It's like if someone can fix an alert by executing a playbook, then that alert should be automated, right? Simple. Leverage outages. In my case, there was an outage once where with our Apple, so if you use the Stocks app on your iPhone, there was once a pretty big outage, and then it was like the TTR was like 14 hours and 10 minutes, and the TTD was 14 hours, right? So the moment you actually got someone to fix the problem, it took them 10 minutes to fix it. But just because of the fact that there were all these layers in between and not knowing what to do, they were sitting on the alerts, and there was an email that was sent at like 7 p.m. to the dev, but the dev went home. So it's hard for people to, if you're not the people who actually own the product or writing the software, it's hard for people to understand how, what's the importance of an alert. So anyway, that sort of brought to light the fact that, this is like sort of a broken model, we need to fix it. And then when you're sitting in those postmortems, make sure you're asking some tough questions and which you're not necessarily comfortable, so that you can actually highlight the fact that something is not right. And then find your allies. In our case, we talk with a lot of people. You just have to go and find, especially a large company, you have to go and talk with people. You'll always find people who believe in your vision. Buy-in from your teams. When I first said this to my team, they were like, we've been told, I don't know by whom, right? We always hear this crap saying, we've been told that these teams are like tier 1 and tier 2 for the company, which is like bullshit, right? So I'll always question that. Probably not that big of an issue at smaller companies, but anyway. Also things like, can we handle the alert volume? Can we still send some low priority alerts? So I was like, dude, you don't get the point. Like the point is to reduce the alerts, right? The point is to create incentives to keep the alert volume low, and the great way to to create those incentives is to wake someone up at 2 a.m., right? If you have all these layers sitting in between and you're shielded from these alerts, it just doesn't make sense. And then from the dev teams, they were like, "Are you sure you can handle this? Don't fuck things up. This is a pretty big change, right?" And what was the worst reaction was they said, "We will have no one else to blame because those alerts. Remember that outage, right? So it was sitting with a different team, like sitting in a different state, whatever. And when you hear things like this, you're like, what are people trying to do? Okay. Anyway, there's also we have a bunch of pretty senior like architecture, senior tech council meetings. So each time you're trying to bring about transformational change, talk about your vision, talk about the right thing to do, get buy-in from the senior leaders, and then the most difficult part was like those 3 teams. One of them was my team. Team Z, but it was really hard to get the other teams, get out of our way, just because again, there's always going to be, when you go in and say your work is not important, in a nice way, people don't like that. But again, if you can learn to say no, and if you can empower your teams also to say no, then I think amazing things can happen. I think saying no is important. It's really hard to do, but I think it's a very important thing. Also saw this thing on HBR where we talk about the importance of no. So do not underestimate how important it is to say no. Okay, so things were not going that far, and then we were like, what can we do? I mean, we made some improvements, but what really sort of changed everything was there was a new product that was being launched. It was called Daily Fantasy, if you've ever played fantasy sports on Yahoo. It was a new product, high profile, awesome leader, came from a startup. It was a great opportunity for us to show that something as radical as this was possible. So we convinced him, we shipped the product in that model. We call it the DevOps model in quotes, because I think no one knows what DevOps is. But anyway, we showcased to the company that at large scale, something like this, something as radical as this, where you take away 3 layers is actually possible. So we did that. We rolled it out to more teams. We put up blog posts. We gave a demo. We did all hands. And the TDD sort of looks like that, right? Because immediately, because you've eliminated those layers, the alerts are directly going to the dev teams. And we're still doing this process. Not every team is completely bought into this model at Yahoo, but at least the business unit I'm part of, which again shows you how difficult it is to do such a simple change. Just because again, there's like people involved. In terms of insights, again, there's always going to be stragglers, as I just talked about, and you'll be prepared to piss people off, and be prepared to have like some uncomfortable conversations. People even call me the troublemaker, but that's okay. In terms of actually reducing the noise, if there's one thing, if you are like running an initiative at your company, and if there's a number associated and next to like an SVP or whatever, people take that shit seriously, right? So it's a great way to, public shaming or peer pressure is a great way to bring about change, at any organization, right? You don't want like large numbers or like really small numbers next to your name. So use it, especially if you're running like a horizontal, like large scale initiative across a company. And then in terms of alerts, fix alerts closer to the source. I hear companies come in and say, you can throw 1 million alerts at us, and there's this black box that will give you and will somehow make intelligence of all these alerts. Then I don't necessarily believe that stuff. So fix them closer to the source. And then if they, try to differentiate between what an alert is, try to define what an alert is, and then what's the difference between an alert, ticket, and log. Okay, we're done with initiative 1. Awesome. Okay, second one, CD. How many people do CD here? Continuous delivery. Okay. How many do like a version of CD? Okay, CD, you're not seeding to stage and calling that CD, are you? Right? Okay. To us, CD means like no humans allowed. We just push automatically to production. Again, the same question. Option number 1, no humans allowed, humans allowed. If you were to pick something today, would anyone pick option 2? Okay, handful of people. again, I think there is no right or wrong way. There's a philosophical debate around this, but in our case, you know, we had it easy because like Marissa, like our CEO, wanted everyone to be on CD, so it was a mandate. And initiatives like these get easier if they are actually mandates because from top down, because you have no choice. Again, it's not as easy. But anyway, the story is that around 2013, 2014 is when she said, you know, all of Yahoo has to be on CD, and you know, we've been mostly on CD. But there's some stragglers still around, but I think mostly, you know, we've been on CD, close to 100%. But CD, as you know, I don't have to educate you. I'm sure there's been talks around CD as well. I mean, I come from IMU, and I've seen how you actually get to CD like, you know, 10 years ago, similar to how Flickr used to do it. But again, with enough iterations, you get to CD. It is not going to happen overnight. You know, make sure you have a certain, in the core of CD is the certification plan, the gates, and the way you certify something that it's ready for releasing to production. And the fact that, you know, you ship in small batches inherently reduces the risks, right? Which is sort of, back in the day was a bit different. And TDD takes some time. No, even if you work at a large company, it takes time for people to change their mindset to actually start writing tests first before they write the actual code. That's when, you know, again, as I mentioned, it was a CARP initiative. You know, the goal was to, you know, change the culture, to move more towards tech excellence. But it was scary for some teams, especially people who had like, you know, QA, and you know, you have all these large properties, and some were saying, oh, we are, you know, Yahoo, and we are like the pulse of the internet, and we just can't go down. And it's like, that's again, that's bullshit. Inherently, if you're pushing every commit, ideally we don't. But if you're pushing every commit to production, that ideally, you know, reduces the risk. But that's the right thing to do. That's how modern software is actually built. In terms of, you know, CD at scale, if you are trying to do such an initiative, expect failures early on, expect to fail more often than you're actually succeeding. It actually took time for teams to take this seriously. So even though your CEO may come and say, you know, everyone should be on CD, it's not magically going to happen, you know, or certainly not overnight. So it does take time. In our case, it took several years. But what really helped out was if you are planning on running a large initiative at your company, which is more horizontal, like create a team, you know, program manage that stuff. In our case, we have something called WhatDrive, whose only goal is to drive initiatives like these across the company, like tech excellence, best practices, you know, incident reduction, CD, security, and CD was one of the initiatives. The program is called WhatDrive. There's a program management team running it, and I think that's where, like, you know, when you have numbers, it's very objective. Give it some numbers, and then that's when people start to take it more seriously. Again, just the initiatives cannot stick. For something to stick, for something to become part of your culture, all of us should be, like, you know, championing for that. All of us should be advocates for that. So I think each one of us in this room has a responsibility to go back, if you believe in something, to champion for that, and just don't leave that for the leaders to make it. In terms of results, again, velocity definitely increased dramatically, in some cases from days to hours. And then I think for my team, the win was people were like sitting and staring at screens doing releases. Like, what value can someone get from doing that repetitively? Like zero. Yeah. Sure. Sure. This one? Okay. Good. All right. But again, I think the key takeaway here is PD is possible at scale if you can make it happen. You know, we do it at Yahoo. In fact, recently Facebook, I'm not sure how many people noticed, but they released saying that they are also on CD, which is amazing. So seems like everyone is moving towards that model. So, you know, everyone should be moving to that model as well. In terms of insights, again, I think I've covered most of this, but probably the most important thing is some teams were doing it for hitting their quarterly goals and not necessarily embracing the spirit of CD. You know, I think that's where, as I mentioned, all of us should come in and say, try to be advocates if you believe in pushing software that way. Okay, we have 10 minutes left. Initiative 3, automation culture. Same drill like before. You ready for the question? Okay, which option would you pick? Option 1, let's say a container or a server or a VM is in a bad state, is unhealthy, right? Wake up a human at 3 a.m., take it out, take it manually out of rotation. Option number 2 is take it automatically out of rotation, right? Run some diagnostics, and then maybe file a ticket or whatever, and then take a look at it next morning. How many people would pick option 2? Wow. All of us are like radically aligned, right? I'm telling you, you guys don't need this talk. How many people would pick option 1? Any brave souls out there? Option 1? At least one person? Prague, yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I think all of us do this, but it doesn't make sense for, especially if you can auto-remediate something, make sure you're automatically doing that in production. If you're not doing it, it's okay. It's not for me, it's for you. Go back and take a look. But again, if 15% of your containers are in a bad state, then servers are in a bad state, then wake someone up. But don't wake someone up at 2 a.m. for restarting something or taking a machine out of rotation. We actually built a framework for this. It's called Halo. It's an auto remediation framework which can automatically take machines out of rotation. So we built option 2. Can let the machines do the heavy lifting. Obviously, because we have better things to do. Pretty basic stuff. Not going to preach to the choir. But in terms of challenges, when you don't live in a culture where this is okay, right? And sometimes people do it unintentionally. It's like, yeah, it's one alert. I'll wake up. I'll restart a bunch of shit and make things, bring things up. But ask, next day when you come back, which is why if you have the alert volume low, you can actually root cause each incident, right? Otherwise, you'll be so buried in that stuff that you just can't come out of that. So ideally, if you are in that situation, you should come back the next morning, do a incident review or an alert review and look at what happened and see what you can be doing to automate that part or to prevent it from happening again. But some people are going to ask about job security, but most likely, I think the people who are going to ask about it are the ones who are not necessarily evolving with the company, or maybe they're not been taught how to think like it, or have an automation mindset. So I think it's important to invest in those people and see if you can actually get them to change their mindset. And again, making strategic investments is hard, right? Because on one hand, you have your core products, your legacy stuff, you're keeping them up and running, and you're have a bunch of band-aids. But then you want to move them more towards a automation model, auto remediation frameworks, and things like that. But onboarding auto remediation frameworks. But that stuff you have to be building those tools, and that takes time. And normally people don't have time, right? But I've never heard anyone say we have time. So in our case, one way to come out of that was to make some trade-offs. Obviously, when you make a strategic investment, you have to make some trade-offs. So in our case, we handed off some of the responsibilities back to the dev teams, alerts and things like that, so that we could focus on tool building, because I think that's the right model, right? We should not. We'll talk about this towards the end, but I think it's important to be making those trade. In some cases, we also handed back the ownership of some products, so that we can focus on building those tools for the long term. Again, the promise to the team, again, basic stuff. Make sure you're working on higher value add work and not necessarily on low value add stuff. One thing this is an article on HPR, especially at large organizations, when you have already a large user base and people are already in love with your product, the talent can be misused. So I think it's important for all of us, especially leaders, to say no to low-level tasks so that we can say yes to things that matter, right? Otherwise, there's no way you can. That's a good way. But everyone should speak up when you see something which is not right. You have to speak up. Don't be a jerk, but speak up. In terms of the tools, I'd already talked about Halo, which is an auto remediation framework. It is intelligent enough to not take every machine out of rotation. There's a cluster state which is being maintained somewhere. We also have a failure discovery or disruptive testing framework that we have, which can inject latencies into your downstream and then verify that your application is behaving the way it's supposed to be behaving, and a bunch of other tools. So we made the investments, we built the tools. And then the results have been awesome. We have hundreds of auto remediations that happen in production. Several new bugs have been discovered because of that. Just imagine, if your application is misbehaving and your auto remediation framework is restarting it in the background like 100 times a minute, right? That's not a great way to keep the service up. So obviously, monitor your auto remediation framework so that you can actually see what is going on, and you'll be shocked and surprised as to the amount of bugs that would come out of it. Running, I have like 5 minutes. Again, in terms of insights, again, don't build something no one wants. Like, don't build something in a vacuum and then just show up one day and say, you should use this product. Make sure that you are sitting closely, showing an MVP version to the people who are actually going to be using that product, and then iterate based on that. And then a tool that only ops can use is not really a tool. I think a tool is something, if you build it, and everyone should be able to use it, not just ops people, right? Last initiative was our strategic bet on AWS. Again, it's not necessarily, don't limit this to AWS, but any good public cloud. And again, let me ask you a question here. If you were to launch a new product today, where would that product be in, at scale or not? How many people would pick option 1? Okay. And option 2, like in-house data center. Wow, just 1. Wow. Okay. And then option 3. Cool. You guys are playing it safe. Okay. Well, so did we. Well, again, there's no right or wrong answer here. In fact, when I was at Zynga back in 2012, 2013, all new games were launched on AWS, and once the traffic patterns were predictable, they were brought back in-house to a private cloud called Z Cloud. So it's a pretty brilliant idea, like back in the day. But again, why a strategic bet on AWS? Like, I was particularly passionate about this topic for 4 or 5 different reasons. Like, the first thing is billable, right? If you don't bill people for using your computer, whatever, people are going to misuse that shit, right? There's no way. In our case, if hardware takes 6 weeks to arrive, there's no incentive to give it back, right? So it's important to build teams. We did this at Zynga. We don't do this that great at Yahoo, but if you make sure you have a chargeback model where you're actually creating the right incentives where people don't misuse your computer or your hardware. And self-serve is important. Imagine having to talk to your ops team, or I think I heard this somewhere at a conference. If you have to get onto the internet, if you have to call your ISP, that's nobody will ever get onto the internet, right? So it's important for it to be self-serve. You don't want people in between. They call it sort of no ops. What that means is it's self-serve. No ops means self-serve, in my opinion. On demand, I'll use it when I want it. I don't want to hold on to it. It should be on demand. It should be scalable. I don't have to worry about scaling something. It should be there. And then secure, of course. With something like AWS or Google's GCP, at least you don't have to worry about security for the OS infrastructure level stuff. And again, ask yourself, even for a large company like Yahoo, you would imagine for a 21-year-old company, you would think we have all these data centers and hundreds of millions of dollars invested. We still wanted to make a bet, just because again we are not it's hard to compete with teams of armies of engineers, maybe at AWS or Google, who are building these platforms for a living. So ask yourself, is that the right thing to do? And then if it makes sense, go ahead and use something along these lines. I'm not sure how applicable this is for people here. Okay, I have 1 minute left. But in cases of AWS or a public cloud, it's all about the use cases. They have to be killer use cases. In our case, for example, what I really love about is we can still serve some static content from AWS if all of Yahoo's data centers are down. That's a pretty good use case, right? The other thing is for rapid experimentation, you can always do that stuff. In terms of results, we've launched multiple new products on AWS. So if you are adopting a public cloud, make sure new products are launched there. Make sure your applications are cloudified, and I love this because once someone asked me, can we use AWS? I said, heck yeah, who asked you not to use it? So, but importantly, if you're breaking the rules, break them in broad daylight so that people around the company know. I think that's important. And then lessons learned, again, get consolidated billing early on so that it's easy for people to use it, so that they don't have to use pay for it using their credit cards. In terms, again, the insights and lessons learned, probably the big thing here is, again, learn to say no more than you say yes. And reliability is overrated, and no one needs, for example, I always say, even my Apple phone is, or my internet at home is not, 100% reliable. So there's no point in making your service 5 times reliable, right? So that shit's overrated. So understand what a good reliability is, and then so that you can move fast enough, right? And then pick your battles, invest in dev and tooling. I think this is an underinvested area. I think dev tooling is something that can be certainly improved upon. Closing thoughts, I think this is a better model. Core dev teams own everything. If you're writing software, you own it. You own everything. And then the non-core dev teams and the ops teams like do everything else. It's still about ownership, but you own infrastructure, you own automation, you own tooling, you don't just insert yourselves in between, right? I think that's a much better model. There's a good post you should read. Go ahead and do it. Do some reflection. Do some soul searching. My favorite question is like, why does my team exist? What value are we adding? And then do the right thing. You already looked at the slide. And then, if where it's appropriate, say no. And thank you so much for the opportunity.